Personal hygiene of ancient humans. Toilets, smell, teeth, hair, and acne. Let's get into something nobody really likes to picture in detail. What did daily hygiene actually look like for a person living tens of thousands of years ago? No bathrooms, no soap, no toothbrushes, no mirrors. Does that mean they were just constantly dirty, smelly, and falling apart? Not exactly. Let's go category by category. First, the bathroom situation. Obviously, there was no plumbing, no designated toilet, nothing like that. But no toilet doesn't mean no system. In mobile hunter-gatherer groups, there's a very practical reason to not relieve yourself right where you sleep, eat, or store food. Smell attracts scavengers and predators, and human waste left sitting around a living space can spread disease. Ethnographic studies of more recent hunter-gatherer societies consistently show a pattern of designated areas slightly away from the main camp, often downwind, used somewhat consistently by the group. It's not a toilet in the structural sense, but it's a behavioral toilet, a learned, shared habit of, we go over there, not here. Groups that didn't figure this out probably got sicker more often. So, over generations, this kind of basic sanitation behavior likely got reinforced simply because it worked. Now, smell. This is where things get genuinely interesting, because the honest answer is, ancient humans probably smelled like humans, just without anything covering it up. And that might have mattered less than you'd think. Body odor comes primarily from bacteria breaking down sweat, particularly in areas like the armpits and groin. Without soap, this bacterial activity would have been constant. But here's the key part. Everyone smelled this way. There was no clean baseline to compare against. In a world where every single person you've ever met has the same general baseline body odor, it likely wasn't perceived as unpleasant in the way it might be to us, dropped suddenly into that environment from a world of daily showers and deodorant. Smell may have actually served a social function, helping people recognize members of their own group, or even play a role in mate selection, since body odor carries information about immune compatibility, something modern research has actually found still subtly influences attraction today. That said, ancient people weren't doing nothing about their bodies. There's strong evidence across many cultures of using animal fats, plant oils, and substances like ochre, a natural reddish-brown pigment, rubbed onto the skin. This served multiple purposes at once: protection from sun and insects, moisture for the skin in harsh climates, and likely a cosmetic or ritual function too. So in a sense, skincare existed, just in a very different form than a modern routine, more about practical protection than about smell or appearance in the way we'd think of it. Now let's talk about teeth, because this is one of the more surprising areas. You might assume that without toothbrushes or toothpaste, ancient humans had terrible teeth. But here's the twist. Dental analysis of Paleolithic human remains generally shows remarkably low rates of cavities, often far lower than what we see in populations after the shift to agriculture. The reason comes down to diet. A hunter-gatherer diet was typically low in the kind of sticky, sugary, starchy foods that feed the bacteria responsible for tooth decay. Once humans started farming and eating much more grain-based food, cavity rates increased dramatically, something dental researchers can actually see directly by comparing skeletal populations before and after the agricultural transition in the same regions. That doesn't mean ancient people did literally nothing for their teeth, though. There's evidence of toothpick grooves worn into the teeth of various ancient skeletons. Small grooves between teeth caused by repeatedly using something, likely a twig or similar tool, to clean between teeth. Chewing on certain fibrous plants or twigs may have also had a mild cleaning effect, similar in concept, if not in form, to a modern toothbrush. So while there was no dental hygiene routine as we'd recognize it, the combination of diet and incidental habits meant teeth often held up better than you might expect, at least until agriculture changed the picture. Hair care is one of the trickier areas because soft materials like hair don't preserve well archaeologically, so most of what we know comes from much later evidence and comparisons with traditional societies. But there's good reason to think basic hair care existed in some form. Combs made from bone, antler, or wood show up in the archaeological record going back thousands of years, suggesting that detangling and grooming hair was a real, ongoing activity, not an afterthought. Hair washing likely involved water, sometimes combined with certain plant materials that have natural cleansing properties, Plants containing compounds called saponins create a soap-like lather when mixed with water, and these plants are found and used for exactly this purpose across many cultures historically. Now for the part almost nobody talks about: parasites. Lice, fleas, and similar pests were almost certainly a constant presence in ancient human life, especially once humans started wearing clothing and living in semi-permanent shelters, both of which create environments where lice can thrive. Evidence of lice combs, specifically designed with very fine teeth for removing lice and their eggs, goes back thousands of years and shows up across multiple ancient cultures. This tells us two things. Parasites were enough of a persistent problem that people developed specialized tools for dealing with them, and people cared enough to actually use those tools regularly. Another likely method was simply heat. Sitting near fire, or even briefly exposing clothing or bedding to heat, can kill lice and their eggs, something that may have happened somewhat naturally just from how close people lived to fires for warmth and cooking. And finally, the question that honestly might be the most relatable one: did ancient people get acne? The short answer is almost certainly yes, at least to some degree, because acne is primarily driven by hormones, genetics, and oil production in the skin, none of which are unique to modern life. Adolescence triggered the same hormonal surges then as it does now, and those hormonal surges are the primary driver of acne. So the biological mechanism for breakouts has been around for as long as humans have been humans. However, there's a reasonable case that severe, persistent acne may have been somewhat less common in certain ancient populations, particularly hunter-gatherers, for a few overlapping reasons. Diet is one of the bigger ones. Modern research has found correlations between high glycemic diets, the kind heavy in processed sugars and refined carbohydrates, and increased acne severity. A hunter-gatherer diet, generally lower in these kinds of foods, may have resulted in less severe breakouts on average, even if some level of acne during adolescence still occurred. There's actually been research on some modern populations that still follow more traditional, non-Western diets, showing notably lower rates of acne compared to populations eating a typical, modern Western diet, which researchers have used as one piece of evidence pointing toward diet as a significant factor. That said, this doesn't mean ancient teenagers were walking around with flawless skin. Genetics still play a huge role, and individual variation would have existed just like it does now. It's more likely that acne existed across the entire span of human history, but the average severity, at a population level, may have shifted somewhat alongside major dietary changes, particularly the increase in processed and high-sugar foods in more recent history. So, pulling all of this together, ancient humans weren't living in filth, and they weren't obsessively clean either. What they had was a set of practical, learned behaviors, designated waste areas, skin protection using natural materials, diet-driven dental health that was often better than we'd expect, grooming tools for hair and parasites, and bodies that dealt with the same hormonal realities we do, including, yes, acne. Hygiene wasn't a routine written down anywhere. It was just a collection of habits that worked well enough to keep people alive, healthy, and functioning within their groups, refined slowly over an enormous span of time. Thanks for watching.